Doreen, is it time? Okay. Great. Then welcome, folks. We're really glad to have you here tonight. And I'm going to get us started. My name is Amy Antonucci. I'm a New Hampshire Peace Action board member, and really glad to welcome you to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online on July 3rd, 2024. Nope, that's wrong. What are we on? July 1st, 2024. Tonight we bring you To Palestine and Back, Bearing Witness with Mary Westfall and Emma West Rasmus. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all, one based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. In that spirit of respect, I would like to start with an acknowledgement. Maybe I can share a screen here too. Yeah, that's good. Here we go. That we here in New Hampshire are doing our work on Yidakina, the traditional homelands of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. And we want to honor them and the relationship that they've had with this place for many, many generations. Quick reminder on our Zoom guidelines. We love it when you have your video on. It's really fun to see folks, although since we're recording it, we do understand if you don't want to do that. We will keep your audio muted to start with, at least. You can use the chat to ask questions, and later we'll have hand raising as an option. We also want to mention that tonight we are going to cover some topics that can bring up some really strong feelings for some folks. For most folks, really, and we ask that you just please treat each other with dignity. We will remute or even remove people who behave in a way that feels unsafe to others, like swearing and insulting each other. We want you all to be engaged and to be heard, but we have a commitment to protecting everyone in the space. So tonight we are really excited to welcome Mary Westfall and Emma West Rasmus. Mary and Emma lived in the seacoast of New Hampshire for at least 20 years and are still known and loved by many people here. I'm sure some of you can give them a wave. Here's a little more about each of them. Mary served as Chaplain and Executive Director of the United Campus Ministry at UNH for 10 years, and then was the head of staff for the Community Church of Durham for 17 years. She's now the Relational co-leader of Coastlands Presbytery in New Jersey. And I'll say that personally, Mary was an important person on my own journey, figuring out my own path when I was a student at UNH Durham back in the 90s. Emma West Rasmus grew up here in New Hampshire, and she is now working as a program manager at the U.S. Department of Justice. A steadfast Democrat for 33 years, she recently wrote an opinion piece for The Hill, declaring a shift in her political allegiance after she went on this trip to Palestine and witnessed the terrible injustice. Mary and Emma traveled to the West Bank and Israel this past February. Since then, they have been sharing their experiences, acting and speaking for peace and justice, and this tonight is a continuation of that work. We'll hear from them, and then we'll move to Q&A, but go ahead and use chat whenever you want to. So please join me in visibly welcoming Mary and Emma. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Amy. And it is a joy to get to see Amy. Certainly, I've connected with her since we were together in the 90s, but our years in Durham and the greater area were really meaningful. So really appreciate the 27 years we were there. Emma was born in Wentworth Douglas Hospital. So we are glad to be coming to you tonight, and we're really grateful for the work that New Hampshire Peace Action has done over many, many years and providing this venue tonight. And we know that it is a challenging topic. Sometimes within one family, people can't even talk about this topic in communities, and certainly within the religious community. It has been very much a lot of dividing lines on what can be talked about. And so as a person of faith, as a faith leader in the Presbyterian Church, though I served the United Church of Christ while in Durham during those 17 years at the Durham Community Church, but as a faith leader, I tonight will really be focusing on the role of Christian Zionism. And I would guess that some of you are familiar with that, but I think it's important as we seek to understand the dynamics today, to understand some of its origins, how it, coupled with some particular political aims, really taking place in the 1800s, not recently, really have shaped American policy and funding of Israel and the militaristic rise there. So I'll be focusing on that, but first I'm going to turn it over to Emma, who will talk more about our experience and what we saw and the people we spoke with while we were in country in February. Thanks a lot, and we're really glad you're all here.
Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Again, my name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns. And would just caveat the very generous introduction provided by Amy, that I am here very much in a personal capacity, not a professional capacity, not speaking on behalf of the Department of Justice or any parts of the federal government. So just to be clear. So I think my focus is really going to be sharing some of the main takeaways, the things that surprised me and us most, to actually, when we were actually on the ground in the West Bank in February of this year. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a few kind of photos and maps just to kind of add to what we're going to share. Can folks see that okay? Great. Great. Well, so I think for me, these are issues that, like many of you, I thought I was really steeped in. I thought I understood aspects of settler colonialism, the history of Israel. I thought I understood these things very well. And I think I was really shocked to get there and realize that so much of my formal education, whether it's, in school, political education, organizing, religious, has not really adequately captured what it really looks like in Palestine, especially in the West Bank. To be clear, we were not in Gaza at all while we were there. And, while it was surreal to know that, the distance between like Nashua and Laconia, like that was the distance that we were to this unfolding genocide. And when a storm would roll in past us, we knew those clouds would be over Gaza in a half an hour. And so, but to be clear, we were just in the West Bank. And so I think for me, some of the most shocking kind of pieces once we were actually there was to realize how much of this conflict is about land. It is at its core, it truly is about land. So I wanted to just share this map of, these are based on the Oslo Accords of the 90s, so this isn't, super up to date or what things necessarily look like on the ground, but I was really struck to kind of learn more about these three areas. So within the West Bank, which is that kind of grayed out area, is Area A, and that's the kind of teal color. Those are Palestinian cities. Those are Palestinian Authority controls administration and security in those areas. Then the orange is called Area B, And those are Palestinian villages where the Palestinian Authority controls the administrative piece of life, but the Israeli Authority controls security. And then in Area C, which as you'll notice is pretty much, it's the grayed out area, most of the West Bank, that Area C is controlled 100% by Israel, both in terms of administration and security. So, you know, when we think about the West Bank already kind of starting with these Oslo Accords, everything was incredibly fractured. You know, you can imagine if you're Palestinian and you're trying to get from Nablus to Ramallah, for example, these Palestinian areas, you're having to cross through areas that are not controlled by Palestinians where you likely are going to be turned away. And part of kind of the effort underway is very much to continue to fracture, especially areas A and B. And when we were there, we heard and witnessed lots of examples of, even though in Area A and Area B, Palestinians should have more self-determination and autonomy over what happens, Israel is still perpetrating incursions, taking away land, dispossessing people of their homes, farmland, and oftentimes in a very violent way. So I think this was just kind of a helpful way to anchor for me. This was a map that we saw while we were there, put together by Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP, and just kind of shows 1918, pre-Nakba, through 47, 60, and 22, this increasingly shrinking, you know, area of Palestine, of the West Bank, and that little kind of strip over on the left-hand side, obviously being Gaza. And the Palestinian man who was showing us this map made it very clear that he saw some very direct parallels to what the US has and is doing to our own Native Indigenous populations. And so for me, it was really shocking to kind of see some of this land disposition out in the open. This is not something that like you have to really search for where to see. It's happening, not happening under, you know, the cover of night. So this photo shows we spent a few of our first days in East Jerusalem, which is the capital of Palestine, held completely. It's an area A area, complete control by Palestinians, and yet this, you can kind of see some concrete like condos coming up here, some excavators. This is Naf Zion settlement, which is Palestinian land, where a combination of Israeli like military and police alongside Israeli settlers who have no claim to the land will just seize property, whether that's existing homes or in this case, seizing the land, destroying what was there, and then building up homes that then the Israeli government subsidizes folks from the US, from other places to come and have this kind of subsidized living. So, you know, we took a tour with the Israelis Against House Demolitions, which is an organization based there that puts together amazing maps and things like that. And they were sharing with us that really for them, and we heard this over and over, that it felt like in many ways, and this is so kind of sick to say, but kind of what's going on in Gaza is a smokescreen. And really what the Israeli authorities and settlers are really focusing on is this land grab in the West Bank, while particularly Western eyes are turned towards the horrors in Gaza. And so this organization has been tracking. They calculate home demolitions in the West Bank, in Palestinian-owned areas of the West Bank, are up 70% since October 7th. And so taking advantage of some of the chaos and horror to increase other types of dispossession. This was a man named Fakhri Abu Diab, who we met in Jerusalem in the community of Silwan. This again is in the Palestinian-controlled areas of Jerusalem. He's a major leader in the anti-home demolition movement. He is like has been a very well-known spokesperson. You know, there are photos of him with secretaries of state from the US and deputy secretaries. He's a well-known kind of advocate and anchor in the community. And it was on our itinerary to go visit him in his home. And the day we landed, our Palestinian host told us, like, unfortunately, and 2 days ago, his home was demolished. So this person that we were going to supposed to learn from, we unfortunately were seeing firsthand what he has been fighting for decades. This is a home where 10 people lived, 3 generations. The home has been there since the 60s. They owned it outright. And this was just kind of a tactic of Israeli army and military to really send a very clear message to folks in this area that they were going to repress this type of activism and self-determination over your own land. And he said, we spent some time with him. We were able to take some rocks and rubble away from his home, which was, incredibly powerful as he starts to kind of do the unthinkable act of rebuilding. And he told us, what is most painful is the demolition of memories. We lost our vision for the future too. So this is more of his home. Just quickly did want to note that was not the only, we happened to see another just driving along the road. We encountered another act of land dispossession. So we were in the Bethlehem area, and we were leaving another meeting, and our hosts on our bus were like, oh, we heard there's a demolition happening. Let's swing by and see what's happening. And there were tons of tanks and 18, 20-year-old Israeli soldiers who were without appropriate documentation, without anything, were just terrorizing this local family and razing their fertile farmland. And we saw it with our own eyes. I mean, it was pretty, this was some of our group interacting with Israeli soldiers, which, as you can see, are very much kids. There was they were doing a photo shoot just to, and I think they have M16 strapped to them that are American made and American funded. The tanks behind them, the tear gas that they have, our Palestinian host, as tanks continue to roll in, we're like, and those are your tax dollars. I also was really struck by, let me just advance the land dispossession is happening beyond what I even kind of imagined going in. So this was actually in Jerusalem, the Armenian quarter of the city. So the city is divided into, the old city is in 4 quarters, and has an incredibly, thousands of years old Armenian parish and community. And Israeli authorities are trying to grab this land too. This site that you see in the photo is 1,000 square meters or 11,000 square meters that were under dispute to build a luxury hotel. And every Friday, the Armenian youth started doing demonstrations, eventually had to stand in front of bulldozers. And you can see here, they've now set up this kind of permanent encampment of tents. They have 5 to 10 people that sleep there every night. This was really jarring. We were, the Armenian youth with their tents there were watching on TV some footage from Gaza. It was just kind of a surreal moment. But this is the young Armenian man who has kind of 4th generation Armenian who's leading this charge against kind of selling off the land and against kind of the Israeli incursions into the old city. This is part of the Israeli forces had started to kind of tear things up until the youth kind of put their bodies on the line. And so this is as much as they were able to do, but they're very much still under kind of constant pressure. Another thing I'll just add, I think, about the land piece was just, I've heard about the checkpoints and, thinking about how I've seen checkpoints used in my life in the US and travel that I've done, and feeling like, oh, it's, generally for order, for safety, rules apply to everybody. Not the case. There are estimated 700 illegal checkpoints across the West Bank. So that is everything from just kind of an impromptu set of gates to big concrete ramparts with kind of turrets and, guns and gunmen stationed on the outside. And even we on our short trip had multiple moments where we got caught up in checkpoints. And the most, I will never forget, we'd had a long day in Nablus, driving back to our hotel in Ramallah, about a 45-minute drive normally. And we happened to be leaving at the time that is when the Israeli illegal settlers want to use the highway. They're coming from work back home. And so the Israeli authorities closed the highway to all non-Israeli settlers for a while, however long they decide. And so we happened to be sitting in our bus, a bus full of Americans with our Palestinian hosts for 3 hours, just sitting there and, hearing about it is not uncommon for babies to be born at checkpoints because they can't get through, people to die at checkpoints because ambulances that get sent partway, they have to dispatch a different ambulance that's allowed in the Israeli area in order to get people through. So people that are literally, being born and dying at these points. And so it was incredibly inconvenient for us. Like, it had been a long day. We were exhausted. Like, people wanted to get home to dinner, a restroom. Like, it was really uncomfortable. And just knowing that this is so part of daily life, it's totally unpredictable. It could be a full day. If you get out of the car, a young student had just gotten out of his car a couple days prior at that very checkpoint and had been shot in the head and killed by Israeli authorities. And so the randomness and the uncertainty is not just a byproduct. It's very much, an intentional piece of inflicting terror. Let's see. Also, just something that kind of the second big thing that for me, I come back with is realizing like none of this is new and none of this started at October 7th or October 8th. And so here we were meeting with the Palestinian Prisoner Society, hearing about the disparate justice system that has existed long before October 7th in the West Bank. So if you're Israeli and you commit a crime or are suspected of something, you'll be seen under civil code, have due process, all of that. Whereas Palestinians, just writ large, fall under military code, which means you could be detained, under administrative detention, which means there don't need to be any charges. There have been 1 million political prisoners, Palestinian prisoners since '67. There had been 7,000 new arrests in the West Bank, random arrests, just since October 7th. So, I'll just kind of leave this piece with, it was one of these women talked about how their entire family, they sleep in their clothes every night. And this is in the West Bank. This is not Gaza. This is in a place where Americans are coming and going. Like, this is not a super rural area. They sleep in their clothes at night. They have their little toddlers sleep in their clothes at night because in the event that the Israeli army comes and decides to seize one or many of them, they don't want to be naked. They don't want to be in their underwear. They want to be, clothed as they're taken out, which is just a horrible, horrible way to live. So this is more, these are other leaders in the Palestinian Prisoner Society. And I'll just end with, for me, that the atmosphere being in Palestine was really shocking. I imagine like many of you have been there at other points, and we were there with a number of other faith leaders who had been there 5, 10, 15 times. And even for them, it was absolutely surreal. And, there is a chilling effect over the West Bank. People are not talking about what's happening in Gaza. It is teachers, we heard about teachers who have lost their jobs for even mentioning things going on in Gaza. So imagine like being a kid and not having family in Gaza, not going into school and not even being able to like talk about things. There is such a chilling effect and fear, which I was not expecting. And really, we did hear from a lot of folks that, this idea of Gaza is the smokescreen, that once kind of there is a ceasefire, that folks in Palestine in the West Bank are extremely concerned that that they're next. That the West Bank has always been the main goal, and this will be kind of the next step in order to claim the land and make the chances of a Palestinian state increasingly unlikely. So I will now turn it over to my mom. I think one of the moving forces of American policy towards Israel really is the impact of Christian Zionism. And so we will turn to that piece of it now.
Great. Thank you, Emma. And I think one of the reasons we want to start with that is just, I think hearing the personal stories, being there, it keeps me from intellectualizing things and really having been with real people in real time, witnessing the land grabs, witnessing the violence on a daily basis, hearing the stories of people who were arrested and then disappeared for months, if not years. And Emma didn't even go into detail about the state of the jails there and the deprivation of changes of clothes. People have sometimes been in their same clothes for a year. Anyway, horrific conditions, indiscriminately being able to arrest folks and keep them for any length of time. And again, instilling just such terror that nobody knows when they will be next. And I think one of the reasons as a faith leader, I wanted to underscore the power of Christian Zionism. And I would just trust that on this Zoom today, there are people who either got smart enough to leave Christianity a long time ago, or you're part of a tradition that is steeped in real social justice commitment, or your own faith has been an amalgam of things. So I'm not coming to talk about anything positive about Christian Zionism or even its affiliation with anything truly Christian. It is a name that has been given to something that the origins of which actually date back to the middle part of the 1800s. Sort of multi-factors were happening at that time. A large part of that was a religious revival. Any of you who are students of religion, a guy named John Darby, who started in the British Isles, promoting this concept that drew on some ancient biblical texts that he and his ilk were translating literally from the book of Daniel about the need for this end time scenario in which Israel needed a homeland. The Jewish people needed to be back on their homeland because this discrete prophetic part of scripture in Hebrew scriptures talked about this time in which there would be this battle. And he interpreted that as the great battle between Christ and Satan, the power of good, the power of evil, that would battle out on earth, on the land of Israel, God's chosen people's land, and that Christ would slay Satan, and in his victory would actually then lift up to rapture, lift up to glory, lift up to heaven, the faithful, which does not include Jews, Muslims, non-believers, pagans, folks of other traditions, even really bad Christians, like, born into the Presbyterian Church and a dedicated person. I wouldn't make the cut. So not that I would really want to make that cut anyway, but I think it's important to understand its deep roots. And while it was emerging first in the British Isles, but then very quickly in the middle part of the 1800s in the United States, causing a religious revival that we study about in history of Christianity, but it never really sunk into me. The other thing that was going on then in Great Britain, a lot of political figures and entrepreneurs and finance people were really concerned about addressing what they actually put in documentation as how to deal with the Jewish problem. They were seeing the growing number of Jews throughout Europe, more and more successful financial dealings, banks, and amassing, more power and authority and control of their own lives. And so starting back as far as the mid to late 1800s, there are documents. And so two of the books that we note at the end give some specific, like you can read the letter that was written from this politician to that one, or this financier to this one, saying, this will be great. Not only can we, basically invent the concept of Judeo-Christianity, we'll say it is so important for us to return the Jews back to their homeland. And so we will have this project whereby, so so what you see is religion and the state in this unholy union, where there's a religious justification for repopulating a place that now is inhabited by diverse folks, but also with a real financial and geopolitical strategy in mind. With the ceding of the Ottoman Empire and this whole area now, it was unclear who would have control. And Great Britain, being the architects that they were of settler colonialism, decided that putting Jewish leadership, especially there, they would have allies in the region to make sure that the region was stabilized with folks they had a relationship, and I do put that in air quotes, a relationship with, and that would also create new avenues for exploitation of the resources, because that area, Fertile Crescent being what it is, like incredible olive groves, fruits, all kinds of abundance there, that they wanted to make sure that the British Empire had access to. And so some of this later decision during World War II, and I do not want to at all just sort of pass over the horrors of the Holocaust. And I think, having been accused, as probably some of you have if you've spoken on these issues, been accused anti-Semitic or insensitive to the plight of the Jewish folks, I am deeply committed to the tradition and the safety of all human beings and all faith traditions. But also, I take very seriously the incredible suffering. That being said, there are many ways in which the reality of the Holocaust and the horror of that was somewhat manipulated by the very forces that were seeking to repopulate an area, not just for noble or humanitarian reasons, but really because of being able to peddle a false narrative that, frankly, most mainline denominations, Presbyterian, other churches you would know of, have condemned that. The Presbyterian Church, of which I'm a part, actually wrote a paper condemning Christian Zionism in 2004. And in our annual meeting taking place right now, they reaffirmed that and doubled down on the importance for engagement and education around the dangers of Christian Zionism. And so why would I really want folks tonight on this hot summer night, when we're telling these stories about our Palestinian siblings that are suffering, why talk about Christian Zionism? Well, Christian Zionism really got its footing in the United States in the latter half of the 20th century. And it became the rise of the evangelical right that has pretty much mucked up a lot of things in politics and in what I would say is the free flow of democracy and open discussion in the United States, by guising everything in religious language and being major contributors to funds that have been used by political folk and ultimately to shape American policy toward Israel. The 20th century version, the latter part of the 20th century version of Christian Zionism really became popularized. I bet some of you know of the book that Hal Lindsey did, The Late Great Planet Earth. And then later in the 90s, Tim LaHaye and a co-author, I'm blanking on his name, the Left Behind series. If you haven't heard of those, that's because you are erudite human beings and you don't read a lot of pop literature. But in the 90s, this series of books, Left Behind, was completely with a strategy of peddling Christian Zionism and this end times scenario that were popular among, I first came across the series on the UNH campus in the 90s with students reading it. And I was trying to engage with students about, their own spirituality and the issues of the time. And because I was not raised in a tradition that embraced Christian Zionism, I kept thinking, well, this is just an anomaly. These students just have never heard about Christianity before, and they read a book. But no, there was this intentional campaign going on throughout the latter half of the 20th century to peddle a form of, I would call it, radical right-wing, evangelical, distorted theology that we call Christian Zionism, but is distortion, taking a very discrete passage of scripture and turning it into something that has been fueling American policy toward Israel for probably 70 years, but definitely has kept America somewhat blind to the reality going on in Israel today and our complicity with a genocide, with a starvation of people, largely based on false constructs that are fueling the military industrial complex that is backing up Israel in its capacity to defend itself, which is really turned it into the aggressor across its own country. So I think one of the things I just want folks to know, it's estimated there may be 30 million Christian Zionists in the United States, and they're peddling it out through their missionary movements to other parts of the world. So it's estimated there may be as many as 50 to 80 million people worldwide who identify as Christian Zionists, who live with this sense that the purpose of Israel is not so that, you know, Jews can live freely and safely, but so that there is this homeland on which this massive battle will take place, in which a certain power, Christ, but a limited view of even Christ, will battle the powers of evil, Satan, and only the very, very few. I mean, you can convert or die, there's also that. And so in 1839, I think the first Christian Zionist Anglican church was built in Jerusalem for converts, Jewish converts to Christianity. And there has been a big push with Christian Zionism. You know, if you Jews want to survive, you better convert. They don't say it that way, but they have tried to establish opportunities to, you know, Jews for Jesus, and really create linkage between Christians and Jewish folk to help them see the light, that the end times are coming. The rapture is not for everyone. And so, and this will be the battleground. And it almost is laughable if it were not having so much power in the world today, shaping our policies. You know, Emma has put her professional life on the line, writing about why she can't support Biden while she serves within the Biden administration, although she's a non-appointee. But in a government where a whole lot of folks are questioning these decisions, and what is it really based on, when popular opinion, global opinion has shifted, and yet we continue to take a stand that is so firm in the midst of a situation that really, coming back, I don't think we've probably either one had a truly restful night and day since then. And I'm grateful that we still are in touch with lots of folks. One of the books that I'm recommending, even if you don't have a religious orientation, is by scholar Mitri Rehab, who actually started Dar al-Khalim University, most of which has now been destroyed. I think now all of the universities, all of the hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed, and they have undermined a lot of the educational facilities elsewhere, thinking that if they don't educate folks, they'll be powerless. But Mitri really looks at the history and talks a lot more, if you want more of that survey around Christian Zionism, but then other forces that are shaping things today. A brilliant scholar and theologian. And then Rashid Khalida really writes from his own family's experience of living in the land. Some of you may be familiar with his book, but I felt like, even with all I've studied as a history major, as a student of theology and the Bible and world culture and changes, I felt incredibly saddened by my own ignorance about things that were taking place pretty much under everybody's nose during the 20th century, that were framed in particular ways that were in the best interest of the Jews. And there's almost no consideration given for the Palestinian people that had been inhabiting that land for, you know, upwards of, well, I worshiped in a church that was 1700 years old while we were there. And so it's not just the Christian presence that's been there that long, but when you have a church that's nearly as old as the story that it's purporting to retell each Sunday, you are reminded that there are people who have shaped that place who are now being brutalized in ways that are just unimaginable. So I think one of the things I want to wrap it up so we can move into Q&A, because I know you're all wise, you're well read. We hope that not too much has been redundant tonight. We want to hear your questions or comments about things. We don't have a list of like asks of things we hope you do. We know that some of you have been getting arrested or risking arrest. Some of you have been speaking out, writing articles, talking to your friends. But we know that, this is a movement building moment, and each of us in whatever capacity we have, whether it's with the way we invest, which I'm grateful that, again, the Presbyterian Church and a number of our denominations are really deep in long-term divestment of things like Caterpillar, and we just divested some more just today of several other things, but news for another day. But how we vote, how we communicate, where we stand up, where we're silent. It is a hard thing to talk about right now. Both of us have lost friends. Both of us have lost colleagues. Emma got in a lot of hot water that she still is in with her job because, and yet at some point, folks, what is worth holding back in a moment when in real time, lives, communities, futures are being decimated in our name? And I'm haunted by that on a regular basis. And I have not gotten fired yet. And I feel like I stand on very strong theological ground. But I think this has got to be this is a moment where if we're not acting, we're asleep or we're calloused. And I don't think most of us are that. It can feel impossible to act. So it can be impossible. We speak about it, it makes no difference. We protest about it, we demonstrate, we get arrested, we show up, we keep amplifying. And I know many of you join that holy cause. We can't stop. And we have to keep speaking because the settler colonizer project has gone worldwide. This is a horrific rendition of it. But this is our story too, folks. This is the story of our nation. This is the story of giving smaller and smaller land, smaller and smaller opportunity, forcing people through death and dislocation from their very own lands. And if we're not the ones who are going to speak about it, if we're not the ones that are going to double down and say, no, not on our time. I was on a talk recently where the speakers were talking about the end times. They said, the end times, not in our time. So we challenge and invite folks to just keep the conversation going in whatever way you're able as we seek to raise consciousness and hopefully work for change. The Palestinian people really deserve it. I would just end by saying one of the other takeaways for me and the many people we met and the work that educators and others are doing with the young was this commitment to the arts and education and continuing to cultivate a very particular kind of resilience in generations of folks who have a lot of reasons not to be hopeful. And I know that just in the last 7 months, 8 months, that hope is really dwindling because a lot of the work and a lot of the suffering that's gone on for decades and decades, 3/4 of a century, has beaten down a people, and yet they rise in powerful ways. In this moment, even they are saying, we don't know what the future is, and if we have a future. Some of that's in our country's hands. So we will, with gratitude, again, to New Hampshire Peace Action, turn it over to Amy to guide some discussion and question time.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Emma. We really appreciate your bringing this this information back. I hear you that it was not an easy thing to witness and to have to hold those images and that experience, and we appreciate your bringing it to us. There are definitely some questions. I'm actually going to first ask one. In terms of Christian Zionism, I seem to remember in another talk, you talked about how many people, how about the money? I mean, I think we're more and more educated in the country about AIPAC, where's Christian Zionism come in terms of how it's funding this situation, let me say?
So something that probably none of you are part of or have visited are the mega evangelical churches. And a big part of the push in a lot of these churches, and they don't have to be mega churches, but this evangelical radical right. And not every evangelical church, not every mega church, perhaps, I don't have proof of that, but are Christian Zionist based. But it's a very prevalent evangelical theology right now. Another part of that theology is an abundance. It's a scarcity generosity model where you're supposed to give to build the kingdom of God. And so a lot of emphasis is put on donating to the church for righteous causes. And so the line kind of goes from a lot of the churches to political leaders or political organizations, initially political organizations that fund campaigns that promote certain ideologies that sometimes are subtle, looking like it's about a certain kind of values, maybe even diversity values, and maybe even seeming, maybe showing clips of Jewish children and Christian children playing together. But immense amount of fundraising going on. And actually some of the richest entrepreneurs in our country identify as evangelicals. And so with some of the folks that have been big donors to the RNC and to certain campaigns, you can trace the line back to their religious communities or religious views. Sometimes it's subtle because there's a lot of masked words for Christian Zionism. There's a lot of other language, but certainly it tilts then toward that part of the world, raising funds, and then our own policy with enough people in place has been able to direct those more and more toward the incredible military buildup that Israel has had access to. Now, the other part of it for our country, we don't have time to get into this tonight, is it is also very self-serving on the part of the US to have, kind of like Great Britain wanted to have a particular ally anchor in that region. Our disdain as a body politic for Muslims is also reprehensible, and that part of what drives our policy is also the danger that the Arab world poses to Israel. And so by having this anchor country that we support, we have a nice launch point for lots of things. We've got access to certain things. I think you all know some of that history, but it's not out of kindness or a desire to even care for the Jews, because if you pull back the veil, Christian Zionism is as much about obliterating the people of Israel as anything. It's so.
Thanks. Yeah, so there are many pieces, but this is one of them, and it has more influence than maybe some of us realized. I want to ask you a question that's been in the chat a long time. I think Jerry wanted to know, this is back when Emma was talking, what's the justification given for the land grabs, for the home, the home demolitions, all that's going on in the West Bank? Is anyone explaining why?
Great question. In short, no. And I think that sense of arbitrariness was really shocking to see. I think as somebody who's born and raised in the US, there is a expectation that, even if things don't turn out your way, there's at least some process. You're going to be clear on what's happening. There may be an appeal. And that does not, that is just simply not the case. And there's really no guise of sometimes a family will get notice that, oh, in 3 weeks, we're going to demolish your house. And a lot of times families will decide to do the demolition themselves just because it's less painful. Folks also have to pay to have their home demolished. So Fakhri Abu Diab, who I showed earlier, is out about, or owes the Israeli authorities over $100,000 for the police time, for the overtime, for the Caterpillar equipment that was used to demolish his own
And
home.
then the cleanup.
And the cleanup.
They haven't paid for the cleanup as well.
Exactly. And something the Committee Against Home Demolitions, which I mentioned, talked about how this is a very old problem of trying to choke out any potential land ownership. So they shared with us that since 1967, there has been no new land zoned in all of the West Bank for Palestinian purposes. And the Israeli Authority denies over 95% of applications to renovate or expand or fix things in your own home. If you are caught having, fixed a leaky roof or something, your home could be arbitrarily demolished. And so, in the case of the farmland that we happen to be driving past, according to the family, supposedly they had received a random notice that their land would be seized and destroyed, but the military showed up 2 or 3 weeks early. And even with this group of, Americans standing, watching, filming, recording, that didn't prevent the land. So at least we could be in solidarity and standing with the family, but it didn't prevent anything from happening either.
Well, and one of the stories we heard was actually the Nakba story of a woman just right before we left. One of the member of our group still had family in a Palestinian family and country. And so we went to the farm and the home of this woman who had been a child during the Nakba. And she told the story of her father being a very world-renowned photographer in Jerusalem, had taken pictures of, royalty, British royalty, and they had a knock on the door. They were supposed to go on vacation for a week and they would be allowed to come back. And of course, it's three-quarters of a century later and she's never been back. But that land, they have legal claim to. They have cultivated it for decades and decades. They have animals, they have farms, and they know that even as they sit there living their lives generation now upon generation in that place, that at any point, especially because they've done such a good job with the land, because the other thing the settlers do, they cut down, they literally decimate all of the native plantings and put in pine trees, because so many of them come from Ashkenazi roots and they have a European sense of things, or they come from the United States. A lot of them get paid. So the land grabbing is done with impunity and without rationale. And if you resist it, you're likely to be killed or definitely jailed. There is no recourse. Wow. Imagine if it were your home.
Yeah. Okay, we have a number of questions. We're not going to get to them all. Let me do Sandra's and then Betsy. Sandra is wondering how you handle conversations with friends or family members who are not as informed as you are on the subject. Any advice?
It's really hard. I think, as my mom pointed out, my 2 best friends from college haven't spoken to me since about October 9th, because one is a Zionist and the other friend is not Jewish, but just kind of decided to lock me out too. So I think it's incredibly hard. It's incredibly painful. I think I keep grounding myself in the fact that there are people who are trapped under rubble, who are losing limbs, who are watching their 200-year-old olive trees be burned by illegal settlers. That what we do on so many issues, this is just a moment that you have to dig deep, whether that means doing your own research so you can go into conversations feeling better able to engage in these things. I think for me, being able to talk from a personal experience of these are the things that I saw, my mom sharing from this is her profession, this is something that she knows about. So any ways that you can kind of speak from your own experience, things that you have seen or know.
Well, and I think I used to be, and I still am on so many issues, I will hang in till the end with somebody. I love my folk, my friends, people in the church, people outside the church, and I just want us to figure out ways to communicate respectfully. And I've determined on this issue, I really am not going to try to convert people, because I think I will bear witness I will speak openly where I can. Emma has jeopardized a lot of friendships, a lot of political relationships that she's had over years of working with some, very well-connected people who have really like completely just shut her off that were friends. And so I would not, I don't complain, but I know that there are things I can't talk about with certain people. And it's sad because you want to be able to communicate and share both its personal experience, but also we don't have the truth on this. We're not even talking to you all tonight to say, this is the way, what's supposed to happen. It's just that we have to keep bringing reality and the human side of this to folks, because it's so easy to have business as usual. For anybody I know, and another group from this group, Israel Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church, another group just went in late May. And one of the people fortunately lives close to me, and we've had to get together several times, because you come back and you feel like you're going freaking crazy, because you feel like you've seen something that's so hard to translate, and then people like either don't want to hear it, or wow, you're really wearing your feelings on your sleeve, or things that just have been like, or even just basically saying rudely, shut the F up. However, we've both been able to find movements. Thank God for students, and any way we've been able to support the encampments and amplifying the voices. Well, in my case, she is a young activist, but that I can use any kind of clout I have to amplify the voices of young people, people of color, Palestinian young people in our country, other Muslim folks in our country, to keep amplifying the voice. These folks put their lives on the line. Many people have families still living within Israel Palestine. And so, we haven't, in one sense, risk anything. And we'll keep speaking and trying to educate anybody to listen. If people won't listen, I decide, you know what? I just will put my energy elsewhere for now.
And I'd just add that I think also something that I found really useful is being able to frame this issue in the context of settler colonialism. The United States has been and currently is a settler colony. And I've gotten really involved in Puerto Rican self-determination and independence movements. We have Hawaii that was an independent sovereign kingdom just a century ago. And then of course, the Indigenous, American Indian, Alaska Native, communities and individuals across the country. So I think ways that I have found success engaging in conversations when I'm able to say, well, of course, here's the US's specific role. Like, I'm not trying to come up with the political solution to a Palestinian state, but here is the nexus of where my tax dollars are going. And this is the really specific kind of US connection. And here's how this same dynamic is showing up in the zoning laws in Montgomery County in Maryland, where I live, and the way we're pushing people out, or the Jones Act in Puerto Rico, and the way that we have tax loopholes that keep goods out of the hands of Puerto Ricans and give huge tax benefits to white US Americans who are traveling there. So I think we are a settler colony, and really holding our own feet to the fire. Like, there are a lot of avenues that we can address this, but stay strong in your conversations with people. I know it's really brutal, and here to commiserate and chat if that would ever be useful.
Thank you.
I would just say, because I know that we're going to pop off, but
Yeah.
I am really grateful that some of the folks that are on tonight, I know, and you are people who have been working on this. Some of them are our friends. I'm looking at Andrea LeBlanc, who I just want to give a shout out to, who's part of the reason I am the person I am today. And so if you know Andrea, then she's been a voice that has made huge difference globally and in the lives and hearts of many of us.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, we have hit 8 o'clock. So I am sorry to those of you whose questions were not answered. And sometimes we try to extend it a little bit, but I know a bunch of you are headed from here to Mazen Kamsia's 8 o'clock conversation about, I think, environmental colonialism, some combination. So I'm going to wrap up so that folks can head off to that. And what do I want to tell you? Let's start with this. Stay in touch with us, nhpeaceaction.org. And we're on Facebook, and you can learn more about what we're working with and what programming we have coming up. And I'm going to give you a little taste of that. I'll be fast. First, for in-person, Wednesday, ceasefire vigils for peace. Wednesday, July 3rd, 2 to 3 at 660 Central Ave, Dover. That's Congressman Pappas's office. Thursday, July 4th, they are going to vigil, noon to 1, City Plaza in Concord. And then Wednesday, July 10, 2 to 3, we'll be back at Senator Shaheen's office, 340 Central Ave, Dover. Back to online, I want you to know we're co-sponsoring a July 9, 8 p.m. panel online about debunking deterrence theory and pursuing global nuclear disarmament. Our friends Joseph Gerson and Kevin Martin are moderating an impressive lineup of speakers. I'm sure they will get into what's going on in Saudi Arabia with the US involvement there, helping them go nuclear. Our next online Peace and Justice conversation is Monday, July 15, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Militarizing U.S. Borders, with Arnie Alpert, who traveled to Eagle Pass, Texas, and Mexico in May and has a lot to share with us. Note that this series is free and open to everyone. That said, we definitely can use your donations, and the donate button is, or link is in there. It's nhpeaceaction.org/donate. And with all that, just if you can all join me very visibly thanking Emma and Mary for spending this time with us and for taking this difficult trip and working on an issue that is heartbreaking. But obviously, we're a bunch of committed folks. Go ahead, Emma. Mary, did you want to?
I was just going to say, stay strong, keep talking, just keep being loud, keep being loving. That's going to win the day eventually. Empire crumbles, folks. Eventually, empire crumbles.